Good evening. It is Monday, February 6th. This is the Guilford Board of Education. Tonight, we're holding a special Board of Ed meeting to deliberate and vote on a final budget to put forth to the Board of Finance. Dr. Freeman brought a draft budget to us early in January. The draft budget represented a 4.78% increase over the prior year's budget. The drivers of this budget are medical benefits, which are an increase of over $800,000 this year. Salary increases that come every year, and a reminder that salaries make up about 60% of our budget, and benefits make up approximately 20% of our budget. So simple math, 80% of our budget is really the people who do the hard work with our students. We did negotiate administrator contracts and teacher contracts this past year. I think we noted at the time that we voted that we are seeing increased wage increases for both those groups. This comes as a result of the pandemic and what our teachers really had to do to continue to provide for our students. It is a product of inflation, and it is something that was seen really across the state in districts who were negotiating salaries. We did reach our salary or our negotiation package with the teachers through mediation, but we'll note that we are extremely proud of the work our teachers do and believe that investment is well worth what we put into it. I will note that other things that are impacting this budget. The ESSER grant funds are coming to a close. Those are American Rescue Plan funds received by the school. I want to say that this budget reflects one position coming off of that grant, two other positions that are on that grant that we would like to keep are those that the administration is thinking they can get additional grant funding for, and we may talk about that a little bit tonight. But I appreciate that our administration continues to find ways to decrease the budget and fund really important work in this district in other ways. Lastly, I will note that inflation is at 6.5%, and that has had an impact on our thinking and our calculating budgets. There's other districts as they get to voting on their budgets, I think are finding themselves in really likewise challenging positions around some of these drivers that I've mentioned. I will note a couple of school districts. This is in no way representative. New Milford Public Schools just closed, or the Board of Ed just voted on a 5.03% increase. Norwalk Public Schools, 12.7% increase. Newtown Public Schools, 4.7%. Shelton Public Schools, I don't know, for those of you who read the New Haven Register, there was an article yesterday. The Board of Ed was deferring their budget by a couple of days as they tried to determine a 7% budget that came to them. There is a range. Some of them are lower, but this is something that Board of Ed across the state are really dealing with. We did have two public forums in the end of January, and we had public input mostly around some athletic requests. And the last thing I just want to mention in terms of information is that the Board of Selectmen did meet this morning. They voted on the town budget. They landed at 3.65%. Their budget will also go to the Board of Finance, and the Board of Finance will then deliberate over both the town and the Board of Education budgets. I'm going to pause and turn to Dr. Freeman and ask if you have any opening comments you want to make before the Board of Ed deliberates tonight.
No, I appreciate well, yes, I do. I appreciate the conversation that we have been having around this budget. I appreciate the statewide context, Dr. Balistraci, that you just provided. I will remind the board and the community watching tonight, as a starting point, we recognize that our budget, our draft budget is now $40,000 short. The first thing we need to do is address new information from the pension commission that we need to increase that pension contribution by $40,000 from the initial draft that we brought forward to you. And then I also want to build, Dr. Balistraci, on one comment that you made and a comment that I know that Mr. Hoey made this morning at the selectmen's meeting that I don't think we've highlighted quite sufficiently in our deliberations. The budget that sits in front of the board tonight sits at a 4.78% increase. Our initial draft was also significantly higher. No building principal or department head who brought forward his or her budget received all of what they asked for in those proposals. We worked diligently to try to bring this draft budget in at a 4.5% increase, and in fact stopped trying when we realized we were down to bone and there were not more decisions to be made, or there weren't decisions that we were comfortable making before bringing it to the board. I know there has been significant conversation about Mr. Jarvis's athletic proposal and how he had asked for 4 assistant coaching positions, and the draft in front of you tonight only holds 1 assistant coaching position. The athletic budget sits at a 13.4% increase at this moment where it sits. Mr. Hamill had requested leadership stipends for teachers, the team leaders at Baldwin. That did not make it into the budget. There were other positions, there were other equipments that were requested. And so I think it's important to recognize that this budget, even though it is a significantly large budget, is still an exercise in compromise, and it doesn't represent all of what we would like to see in any area. Athletics isn't funded to the level that I would prefer to see. Baldwin isn't funded to the level that I would prefer to see. It's an exercise in compromise, and we still recognize that it's a significant ask on the part of the schools of the community. So just wanted to highlight those pieces, and then we stand ready to support the board and answer your questions as you deliberate and come to a final budget draft.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the things we, Dr. Hirsch and I were able to be on the Board of Selectmen meeting this morning via Zoom. One of the things we heard was an acknowledgement by the first selectman of ways that they were able to pare down what the departments had come to them with. And it's really important to make clear that that process on the Board of Ed side happens by Dr. Freeman and the administration, much of it before it ever gets to us, that there's just a careful vetting of each of those requests. The only other thing I want to mention is that Dr. Freeman, in his budget presentation in mid-January, had a slide that noted cost drivers and kind of the percent of the increase that represented. I wanted to just add to that a little bit as I went through this budget. There's a note that the salary increases, excluding investment positions, is 2.18% increase. Medical benefits at over 800,000 is 1.23% increase. There's a significant increase in transportation at 284,688. There is, after a careful assessment of where we think tuition tuition needs to be, 87,000 there. Heat, I mentioned that we are experiencing in this budget recognition of added costs for a number of things that I think we as personal residents of Guilford know in our own home. There's heat. I also want to note, though, and add to that list, that there are a number of positions in this budget that I think I would like to include because they are existing positions. They are positions that were brought into the school district over the last year to meet the needs. There are 3 elementary teachers that were brought in to make sure that we retain class sizes within the Board of Ed recommendations, a 0.5 special ed teacher and a 0.5 FOIA clerk. And when we add these together, I calculate that at a 4.48% increase. My point in bringing that up is that the delta between that and the 4.78 is really, really small. And you've heard, for those of the community who have been able to either be at our meetings or watch us deliberate about this, most recently last Tuesday, I think we've noted that each of us, as we go line by line through this budget, are really struggling to find areas where we might recommend a reduction. I'm going to stop talking and I want to now turn it over to my colleagues. Tonight's a night where we are going to talk about what's in front of us, talk about any decisions we might want to make to change the budget. I do have a kind of a sheet in front of me where I'm going to be kind of keeping track of the discussion so we can add and subtract. I know Mrs. Trudeau does a fabulous job of backing me up. So if I make an error, she catches it. And I will note that we will start the discussion already acknowledging that the pension line needs to have additional $40,000 because post the creation of this budget, the administration was alerted of that additional need to meet our pension obligations.
Dr. Bellis-Tracy, I should also add, the last time we met, we let you know that we will continue to touch base with our medical insurance consultant.
Great.
And that we were hopeful that the most recent experience would allow us to bring good news and tell you that we can adjust the medical number down. We cannot do that tonight. We spoke to Joe Spurgeon earlier today. He told us that the last month claims have been in alignment with where they were before, and he is not confident reducing the medical contribution at this time. Now, we still have more months of experience that will come in between now and when we finalize a total town budget. But tonight, he is not confident and is not recommending that we make a reduction to the medical line.
Okay. So I know that we have asked a number of questions at our meeting last week. We've asked a number of questions to Mrs. Trudeau, who has given us answers to those. We have talked about some athletics. I know there's been some discussion around the addition of a world language instructor at the high school. I know there's been some discussion around some bonding, and I really am turning it over now to my colleagues, whoever would like to go first, and start to discuss any of these or other issues as we start to deliberate.
If I can go, just like to comment that when we first received the budget increase, I was surprised and impressed that we were able to keep the budget increase under inflation. That's amazing. Frankly, I thought it would be much worse. So I commend you guys for doing a great job. Thank you. Thank you.
I felt exactly the same way. As I was kind of going through this budget this year, I feel like in years past, there have been parts of the budget I felt like we could cut if we needed to. And this year, I didn't have that feeling. Like I felt like this was super tight. I also was impressed that we were under 5%. I figured you were going to give us something over 5%. So I think this is a really lean budget. I guess maybe a place to start would be with world language. We did have a lot of conversation about how the French, like we're going to drop a 0.4 French teacher, and we're going to potentially be adding a 1.0 Japanese teacher. And as you know, we were chatting tonight, I would love it if you could kind of explain to the community what you and I chatted about a little bit tonight about what that world language teacher might wind up looking like.
Yeah, I want to thank the board for the conversation last Tuesday evening, and I followed up with Ms. Chaff on that topic after our conversation Tuesday evening. Again, to be really clear, we're currently sitting with essentially 2.0 FTEs in French. That is made up of a full-time French teacher, a teacher who teaches both Arabic and French in balance, and a part-time French position. Two things are happening to make that a challenge. French enrollment is dropping slightly as we move forward, and in this teacher shortage, and particularly in the world language area shortage, we are finding it more and more difficult to maintain a part-time teaching position. The fact is we can't keep it filled. As soon as we find a part-time teacher, somebody offers that individual a full-time position in another district, and we cannot reliably keep that position filled. The suggestion has been that we eliminate the 0.4 French and replace it with a 1.0 Japanese position. And that would be a net increase of 0.6 in world language. Last Tuesday evening, one of you asked me if we were confident that we would find a Japanese teacher in this environment and be able to fill that position. And I said reasonably so. And followed up with Ms. Chaff and talked about our strategy for filling that position. And we started talking about, if we post in March, how long will we go before we decide we're not finding the right candidate for Japanese, and therefore we have to pivot and do something different. And she and I realized together that the most thoughtful strategy will be to advertise for a 1.0 world language position in multiple language areas. Cast the broadest net that we can cast and find the best, most qualified teacher in an area that complements what we're offering, and then move forward with that as our strategy. And so there are still some logistical details we need to figure out, like the course catalog and how we will do student interest and how we will do student enrollment in that. But we believe from the HR perspective that casting the broadest net at a 1.0 will give us the best opportunity to bring that candidate in. Now, that also overlaps with the retirement savings conversation that we're having, because to put Ms. Chaff in the best position to hire, I cannot put a cap on the salary that she would offer to hire in that position. I'm not telling her that she needs to find somebody with fewer than 5 years experience. We need to be prepared, if we expect to hire away from another district, to hire an experienced teacher who will stay with us, that could be at the top of our salary scale. So again, as we move later to talk about retirement savings, it's this decision and others like this that will make it difficult to take a significant projected retirement savings when we need to be competitive in a really tight field, especially in areas like world language, science, and special education. So again, I really appreciated the conversation that we had last week, and it's helped us to evolve our strategy for filling that position.
Dr. Freeman, on that language conversation, there was an IB presentation last Thursday night for sophomore parents, kids going into junior year, an overview of IB. And one question, a concern that came up is that IB French. And will they be able to carry it forward if there is a concern around the faculty position being reduced? And Mr. Buono followed up with, please understand that we're still looking at ways to solve this, to address this, because there's a lot of concern out there that in shifting to another language, the kids coming up who are now sophomores, will they be able to do the IB program if French is pulled away?
We will make and again, remember, we're going from 2.0 FTEs to 1.5. French is not being eliminated at the high school. We will make every effort to insulate the 11th and 12th graders continuing to take French. It may become less possible for a freshman to come in and take French. That person may need to make another decision if the French offerings fill, but we'll make every effort to insulate at those higher levels.
Right, but what happens to the IB program in terms of language offerings? Because then it would just be reduced to only Spanish, correct? Or,
Unless we begin to offer, and there's an IB term for it, but I'm going to call it a beginner language. You
okay,
can also offer a 2-year experience in IB for a new language. And so it could
Okay,
be an
good.
opportunity to
Okay.
offer an Asian language or an Eastern language in IB. Now, again, for a student who's spent 2 years studying French, would he or she want to start a new language in IB? But there are different ways to
and
introduce
the
language.
teachers can be IB certified and.
Yes,
Okay, got it.
Correct.
Great. That was just, that question started circulating around when this came up, so thank you.
And one of the people in our audience, at the last budget meeting after came up and said, why Japanese as opposed to Chinese, for example? Given where the world is and wondering if we already had a Japanese program that we were trying to follow through. But your comments tonight about a world language position means that this may all serendipitously turn out to be Chinese.
I think the goal is to expand our offerings,
Mandarin.
right? To expand our offerings and do it in a way that is exciting and broadens that, but not pigeonholing ourselves to one rather arbitrary decision that we made.
So in essence, what we're saying is we're trying to figure out how to enrich our curriculum with an Asian language as opposed to a particular one.
I think that would be the first choice, and doing it in a way that is thoughtful and responsible from an HR perspective and sustainable from an HR perspective.
Other questions about the language position at the moment?
Athletics.
Yes.
There's been a lot of conversation. It is the predominant conversation we've had in our budget hearings that is brought to us from, and it's not just this year, it's previous years. So I think we need to note, you mentioned that the athletic budget increase was something like 13%. So, in a sort of almost a defensive way, but I think what I learned from this budget hearing so far is only 1.25% of our entire budget, 1.25% of a $68 million budget goes for all of athletics. So when we are talking about increasing athletic money with regard to all the requests that we have, we're talking about an increase to a very small percentage and relatively few dollars. And before anybody thinks that we're all rabid athletic supporters because we're talking about athletics. My own view, at least, is that there's so much benefit and value that students gain from not only athletics, but all of our extracurricular music and art and theater, et cetera, that when we call athletics extracurricular, we probably do an injustice to all of our extracurricular activities. I don't like to think them as extra because they're so powerful that they really are part of our curriculum because we've agreed we're going to support them. And if we're going to support them as powerful educational experiences, the way I would think about it is that it's as legitimate to talk about increasing athletics, given our low level of dollars, as it is anything else. And in that light, that context, we should not shy away from taking seriously the requests of people to support where parents are now paying monies just to keep a basic sport going. That doesn't mean that we should agree to offer all sports just because people want them. But if we're going to support them at all, we should ultimately, over time, support them sufficiently that we don't burden parents in an extra way.
Oh, I agree with everything you said, and you're right. I think my comment was a little defensive because I was beginning to feel that there was an unintended narrative out that we haven't invested in athletics in this budget, when in fact we've made a pretty aggressive investment and already committed to matching it next year as well to correct some longstanding shortfalls. I just don't want the community to hear these conversations and think that this base budget doesn't already include a significant, and again, in percent increase, it's close to 3 times what the base budget is going up in that very small portion of the budget that represents athletics.
And what this, what the draft budget includes, just in case there are members of the public who are not yet aware, it includes, additional 20,000 additional dollars for hockey ice time. I'm looking at Dr. Freeman because he can correct me if I misstate. $4,000 in addition for to support pool facilities. There is the addition of an assistant coach for tennis, which was one of the requests from the athletic director. And there is an increase in the athletic trainer, which is required because of the difficulty in gaining athletic trainers, much like other positions at this point across districts. They are in high demand. And Guilford Public Schools had to increase the amount they were offering to get those services so that we made sure that we had appropriate training for athletics. I think that besides,
As well as a contractual increase to
That's where
all
I was just going.
coaching stipends
Right.
that was negotiated as part of that overall teacher contract.
so that those are the additions in the athletic budget that are in the draft budget as it stands. I know that there's been conversation both at the public forum about other thoughts. So I'm open to hearing what my colleagues are thinking about in terms of the athletic part of the budget.
And then again, I'd like to be clear, there was a written answer about increases to athletics, and we tallied those and I believe put a $57,000 price tag on that. To be clear, that is an a la carte list. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be any portion up to those $57,000. And that was a list of essentially things that were proposed by Mr. Jarvis or suggested at public comment that didn't make it into the base budget, but have been on the table at various times. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing decision.
Does it make sense to run through that list for the public? Happy to just kind of rattle off what those are.
And I'm just going to name the following as we have the discussion, because we can go through this in a number of ways. We can talk about additions that either are necessary, again, the $40,000 pension, or those that members of the board would like to consider. I would suggest that we then look at reductions and things we would like to consider, because in the end, I think we're going to want to strike not only a balance on not only decisions on an item by item basis, but really look at the balance of where we are and where we want to end up. So I just wanted to suggest that as an approach.
And just so I know where we are with the 40K of pension, Linda, what does that put the grand total increase at? Is it 4.84?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So if we added pension increase and made no other changes,
Right.
we'd be at 4.84 tonight.
And if we added another $57,000, which would cover virtually all the requests, including cheerleading, that we've gotten in our hearings, that would add a little less than 0.1% more. So that would make it
I have 4.93.
4.93. So so that's what we're facing, I guess, is now that we found out about the $40,000 tonight, the additional $40,000.
Sure.
We got some helpful information from Linda Trudeau and Dr. Freeman today in terms of athletics, some additional kind of prioritization of some of the coaching requests that were not included in this budget, but some really helpful explanations as to kind of student to coach ratios that kind of start to get a little concerning. And it definitely seems that in terms of priorities, tennis is where we're providing for one assistant coach, but it would likely be much better to have two assistant coaches this is 20 more athletes with one coach, she said. Then moving down, again with cross country and assistant coach, that both teams share one assistant coach right now. And then dance squad, and I knew this just because a friend of mine helped with this. The dance team is a club, has had volunteers run the program. So that was hoping for a stipend to add a position for that. And then the last one was high school assistant coach, and that one position was
Football.
removed for budget cuts and never put back.
Yes, sorry,
Football, sorry. So that was really helpful, so thank you. And those were, again, not in our current budget, but information that we requested so we could better understand why they were originally requested. And, you know, something we could talk about here or not, but just to give some explanation as to what those other coaching requests were.
I would like to see us fund through our district budget as much as we can, pardon me, of the assistant coaches. I feel like it's somewhat our obligation to make sure that we've got good ratios between adults to students on these fields, in the pool. I have some safety concerns about if we don't have a dive coach, for example, and we've got kids kind of practicing on their own without enough adult supervision. I worry that we're going to put kids in compromising positions. So I personally am a little uncomfortable not funding assistant coaches when we know that they're needed.
And if I just may, and I'm going to ask a question here. I do think that there is a dive coach available to the students on the dive team that is on the Brantford
Correct.
team.
Not
Okay, I
available.
just want to,
Not
Not
available
available
when they have.
when
matches.
they
Yeah.
have matches, but I do want to make clear that we are not, that
They're not.
Guilford
Right.
Public Schools
Right.
is,
Right.
well, is leaving kids without
Correct.
correct supervision at a swimming pool.
And it is not unusual for swim and dive teams to have one combined swim coach. And so we always have lifeguards on duty. We always have appropriate adult supervision. That's not to say that we have the level of support and coaching that the community has been asking for, but it is appropriate and safe and responsible level of supervision at all times. We would cancel a practice before we would allow it to
Okay.
be unsafe.
You're making a suggestion
Well,
about
I
adding
would like to
coaches.
suggest that we add the assistant coach for cross country, a stipend for the dance club, the assistant coach for football. I'd like to see that added back in. And then maybe I'd like to discuss the dive team. I know that we've made a lot of accommodations this year and last year for pool. And if people are feeling that we've got diving covered, I don't know. But I do think that this is not a lot of money in order to be able to provide appropriate coaches for kids. I mean, I think that coaches have a significant impact on children's success, on children's psyche, on their social and emotional sense of self. I know for me personally, my track coaches have been instrumental in my life. They helped me get into college and they were great there too. So I don't know, I would be in favor of adding back in some of these assistant coaches. I'd like to have a conversation about dance and cheerleading. But before we get to that, I think maybe we should just talk about some of the other assistant positions. I'd like to see what everyone else thinks. What do you guys think about adding back in cross-country football? Obviously, we're doing tennis. And dive.
I heard a suggestion that 4 assistant coaches be added, cross-country, dance, football, and dive. I think that there is, and I think there was some conversation about this last time. The dance team has been a club that has been covered by volunteers, and it could be moving into a funded coached position. I believe there was a suggestion at the last meeting that cheerleading really very recently came out of the budget. And if there is interest in seeing it return to the budget, it could follow that same evolutionary path that dance just followed if they end up in the budget here. And that is not to minimize the importance of it, but it is a way to show that there is existing and continued interest before maybe putting money in there for a position that doesn't fill. And so I heard a suggestion of 4 assistant coaching positions to be added, built around that logic.
Dr. Kim, just a quick question about the trainer, the athletic trainer. Who benefit, like, how is that responsibility shared when you've got football team on this field and the field hockey down here? Like, how is that person's time shared? And to what sports does it typically?
At golf cart and radio. So
No, I understand, but like the hockey team's not seeing that trainer and the swimmers aren't seeing that trainer, correct? Like that trainer is really for the field teams. I'm not
Yeah.
criticizing that. I'm just trying to understand.
I believe that trainer is available for when we have home athletic practices and events that are happening. When we travel to an away location, there is generally going to be medical support provided by that district at the home location. I would actually have to look into how that gets covered at the ice and the pool facilities that aren't usually, I mean, sometimes we're at
True.
another school's
Yeah.
home rink, but oftentimes we're at a rental facility, and I'm going to assume that when we rent that facility, that there is some ability to have that kind of support, but I would have to check with Mr. Jarvis and confirm that.
And does the trainer also provide support for, a kid who has to go to practice, has a sprained ankle, they'll tape that ankle up and then off you go, whether it's a practice that's happening here or a game that's happening off site. So like, are they also providing kind of medical assistance for injuries?
To our on-site activities that are happening. And so if it was a visiting student who twisted an ankle, our trainer would assist in that situation as well.
Mhm.
And so some of it is preventative care and some of it is injury care that they provide. Yes.
And also includes things that, my son, when he was doing crew, pulled quads, and so was not practicing for a couple days, but was going to the trainer every day to either get ice or whatever. So was supporting
Yes.
athletes in recovery to get them back
Yep.
to whatever. I had a question as we're going through this. I see in Mr. Jarvis's priority list that Moira, you were just going through a dance squad coordinator with a club stipend. And I see on the list a coach for the dance club, and they're slightly different amounts.
We would need to budget amount, and I would need to negotiate with the teachers union about what was the appropriate stipend level, but we would put in a number that would cover whichever way that landed. So all of the stipends for extracurricular, co-curricular activities are listed out in the contract.
Right.
And if we add something that's not currently in the contract, we would have to negotiate where that falls.
Okay, so should we, if this is something we're considering and I'm accounting for it, I'll consider the 3505, which is the assistant.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I have heard a suggestion, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are making that we consider for discussion, adding assistant coach to cross country, a coach to the dance club, assistant coach to football, and the dive. Or I'm sorry, I'm getting confused about what people.
Those 3 for sure. I think that we can have a conversation about dive. I didn't realize that they had access to that Branford coach at practices. So I know that we're making a substantial increase in pool time. So I feel like we're taking a good bite out of the swim team's parents' obligations. So I don't know about the dive coach.
Okay.
I don't know if we can add it, I would rather add it.
Okay, I'm literally just trying, but thank you, sorry, I'm just trying to identify
Sure,
what the
add it to- let's
discussion.
add it
the
to the
discussion is.
Two, so I think it was
Okay,
an additional assistant tennis coach, because there is
Yes.
one in the budget. The way this explanation came to us today from Dr.
so you want to consider also an additional assistant tennis coach?
That would make 6 coaches, 6 assistant coaches total,
5. Oh, no, 1 tennis already in.
right?
Yeah, one tennis.
Tennis is already in, right?
Right.
So then another tennis, another assistant cross country, the dance squad coordinator, and the high school assistant coach football.
For football.
So it's a total of 5 that would be in the budget, because we currently have 1 assistant tennis coach.
Right.
And Kristen is suggesting also a conversation around the dog team. So
Oh,
on the
right, sorry.
table
Okay.
for discussion, it sounds like our 5 additional coaches.
Mhm.
Are we sure that that
Team
tennis
has-
is an additional?
Yeah, because in terms of the notes,
That's what it said.
we currently are providing for 1 shared assistant tennis coach.
No, this is what's budgeted. It's proposed 3505. That's this one right here, 1 shared assistant tennis coach. That's what's being budgeted.
Right, and then in these notes here under coaches is 2 assistant tennis coaches, $7,010.
Okay.
So I'm trying to.
Which is already in.
I'm trying to understand what's,
We need to add a shared coach or have an assistant for each program. So I think the shared is that,
Yeah.
this is exactly what this
Okay.
is.
okay, so the shared one is you're sharing
It's
that
in the
between.
budget.
The shared one is
or
the
it
one that
just-
is
In the
built
budget.
into our base
Yeah.
budget.
Okay.
And I would suggest that we allow that to go into place and assess whether it meets the needs before adding a second.
Right.
Got it.
So I would still suggest that I'm hearing 4 additions to the 1 that is already in your draft
Okay.
budget, which would make 5 new assistant coaches
Right.
over where we are today.
Right.
And while we're sitting in our addition mode, we probably just need to remind ourselves that we face a budget next year that's already in many ways fixed at a certain increase because of the contracts that we've got. So we're not facing an easy year next year. And anything that we don't fund this year, we will be facing, if we think it's necessary, eventually next year. So it's hard to put things off now, thinking that we might do it later. And to the degree that the marginal cost of these things now is relatively small, it just may be wise to bite the bullet, assuming we can make some cuts to do this. So, but we are facing a tough budget next year automatically. And we're facing the same question with bonding. We know we have much bigger bonding next year. So how do you take care of the stuff this year?
And did you total those 4 positions?
15,197.
How much?
$15,197 if we were to add the 4 as they have been proposed.
That's
And
one.
you started to ask a question about dance versus cheer, and I'm gonna suggest that's a helpful discussion before we, or at some point in this discussion about what we add or what we don't. If there's a question about how those 2 are, what your thinking is.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly heard from several people in the community asking us to add a cheerleading coach back in. I mean, I would love to have a cheerleading team. I think that sounds great. You know, we're a high school. I think it would be really fun to have cheerleaders there and a pep squad. We talked about it in our caucus quite a bit. It was actually, I think, the most discussed topic in our caucus. And where we wound up was while we were somewhat split, we felt like if cheerleading is going to get added back into the budget, we would like to see cheerleading perhaps self-fund a little bit next year. We understand there are different avenues that they can go to within the community to try to get some funding and kind of run the cheer program. And I think our group's feeling was if they are able to do that, perhaps it's something that we can add into the budget next year. And that maybe for this year, we fund a dance coach and in hopes that that dance coach can kind of attract some of the girls and boys interested in cheer and kind of have a spirit club or like a pep squad so that it becomes kind of a hybrid dance cheerleading group where maybe they do go to some of the games, maybe they do go to some of the competitions and kind of really use that as a launching point for this new sport.
If there is an adult willing to volunteer their time as a volunteer coach, then we could certainly support as a club the way we've supported the dance club up until a possible change, depending on the board's decision tonight.
Mhm.
Yes, we could be supportive of that.
Right, because our policy is 10
A
participants.
threshold of 10,
A
right?
threshold of 10 active participants, yes.
And we did receive a petition with a number of names on it, I think over 20 names. And we felt like that was a great positive step in the right direction for a cheer program. But without having kind of people in uniform performing the task, it's hard to just allocate funds for it, is how our group felt.
Right, and as a reminder, last year, we did not fund the sailing team that had 9 members. We have to be consistent with our policies.
And years ago, we did this with swim.
Yes.
Right.
It was very much, now we have these thriving swim teams, so it's exciting to think that the
Yep.
same thing can happen. for
Yeah,
cheer
I
and
think it
dance.
would be fabulous.
Yeah, I think we're all in
generally-
agreement of the
Yeah.
evolution of the
Yeah.
club, and I'd love to see it happen.
So come on, students,
Yeah.
we want you to cheer.
All right, so, we have a proposal for discussing, these assistant coaches as a possibility. Do we want further discussion now, or do we want to continue talking about other items in the budget and bring it all together at the end?
When we bring things.
I'm
together
seeing
at the end.
nods.
Yeah,
All right,
we have about 15-1. Is that what the addition is?
$15,197 for 4 assistant coaching positions, and don't forget the 40,000. for
40,000.
pension.
We won't.
are there other, discussions around? We can either discuss if there are any other additions or simply ask if there are any other items.
I would just kind of concur with everything that's been going around the table. This is what's put forward as a very lean budget, right? 4% really is just what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we're really talking about less than 1%. I did not, going through this book this year, I didn't see anything that could be cut. I don't know if this is the right time to talk about maybe some of the bonding stuff, where I do think that there's situations where we can reduce some of the bonding.
Yeah.
I know we've had conversations about those.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Again, I want to thank the board for the conversation last Tuesday evening. We have looked further into the elevator, which sits in the bond request at about $500,000. When we brought that forward, I tried to be really clear that the elevator that currently exists in 595 works. It works today. The idea of replacing it would be proactive, and it would be, I think, almost out of an abundance of caution. We have looked into some of the questions that were raised. We believe that the building functions in 2 different functions on 2 different levels, both that have ground level entrances. I think that the elevator is a nice benefit to have, but we do not believe that it's going to be code required. It does exist today. And as we looked further at the delta between replacing it today preemptively rather than waiting, we think that the significant cost increase is simply going to be inflation.
Yeah.
The difficulty, the only challenge really is going to be that replacing an elevator in our central office is going to be more challenging logistically because central office never goes down. We're not closed for April vacation and we're not closed for the summer, but that doesn't mean that we can't work around it. I, in fact, would like to suggest that the elevator be removed from the bonding request at this time. From the very beginning, we pointed out that there were 3 items. The highest priority is that gym floor in Baldwin. It is the one that directly impacts students and children in the community. I think that if it were a different year and if it were a better budget package, being thoughtful and responsible and preemptive would make sense. In this budget environment, it simply doesn't. And as we all keep commenting about how tight the operating budget is, I think it makes sense to bring down our bonding request. And I think the elevator is the right place to do it. It is kicking the can down the road, but I think it's a responsible kicking of the can, and we should hold on that at this time.
Well, it may also not be kicking the can because it may not ever need to be used. So we just need to see how things play out.
If we get 2 or 3 more years use out of it and then it goes down, we may just decommission it and not be required to fix it at that time, or be in a really different environment where we choose to correct it. But again, I think the preemptiveness of the suggestion was trying to show that we're being really responsible. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right time to do it. I don't know
Maybe
if
not use it for
preemptiveness is
moving
a
in
word,
day.
but I made it a word.
Maybe not use it for moving in days. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and use the stairs.
We can limit the usage to absolute necessity and stretch it for as long as we can. It does still just go up and down, but no, I did look into that.
Okay, so that's something to be part of our discussion as well. I'm gonna move us back, if I can, to the operating budget a little bit. I will note that we know at this point, the operating budget does not take any retirement savings. We traditionally have done that. And we note, I note that we want to take some care. We did note both in conversation and expectation, given the present environment of hiring. And we have a perfect example of that with the 0.4 French teacher, world language teacher, that has been so hard, that position has been so hard to fill. And that there have always been traditionally areas, instructor areas that are harder to replace someone at a lower level, that and then in addition, in the present hiring environment and teacher shortage environment, that we might want to be more careful than usual with that retirement savings. However, I will note that we were in last year's budget. There were a number, actually, and John, I believe you were the one who raised the question, right? At one point, there were a number of positions in different areas of the salary line that we noted. In fact, a person had to be replaced at a higher cost. There were also those that had to be replaced, could be replaced at a lower cost to the budget. And we saw a net savings, retirement savings of per my calculation, 148,356. I want to take care about thinking about this, but I would suggest that there's perhaps some room to counter the 40,000 pension, perhaps some of these assistant coaches that are being asked by some of us to be considered with some kind of retirement savings in that line. I think it would be responsible. I agree with everything that's been said. This is a very tight budget. We've been line through line. But I do think that there may be some places we can certainly take some money out of this budget and try to bring something a little lower to the taxpayers.
Yeah, and Dr. Bellistraci, the only piece that I would note in this conversation, again, we sort of talked about it with the world language position. We've also let the board know that we are optimistic that we will be able to carry 2 mental health positions currently in ESSER through the new mental health grants that are being offered. That's a social worker and a school psychologist. The first round of those grant awards was announced on Friday, and Guilford's application was not in that first announcement. So there's definitely going to be a second round of mental health grants. There could possibly be a third round, but we didn't make the first cut. And so I agree with you. We've always traditionally had savings in retirement, even last year when we were conservative about it, but we've got additional cause to be conservative. So, you know, if we were to budget a $35,000 reduction, a $70,000 reduction, that's assuming that we would get 1 or 2 retirements. But I would caution us about trying to replicate the $150,000 figure that we saw last year.
Please, and thank you. That was my suggestion.
Yes, I understood.
I should have made that clear. Would you please, Dr. Freeman, remind us the 2 positions that are on the ESSER grant that you're hoping to get covered by this application are.
There's a school social worker position and a school psychologist position.
Okay,
And they're continuing to be paid through ESSER through the close of this school year. We are really hopeful that we will be able to shift them into one of these mental health grants and then pull them into the operational budget next year or the year after.
right.
And again, we may still have 2 bites at that apple, but the first bite has come and gone and we didn't make it on the first cut.
Okay, and I do want to, again, just make clear to the viewing public, anyone who might have a question about this, might have heard that ESSER grants, that there's been extension of spending them. If you have ESSER grants and some money still left unspent, I think we are seeing that in some of our larger districts across the state. But to make clear, what we're looking at is having appropriately spent the ESSER grants that Guilford was awarded. We are now needing to find a way to budget those positions that we feel are going to be really continue to be really important moving forward. One of them is the part-time custodian, which is in the operating budget, and then these 2 positions that we're hoping. Okay.
Do we have any sense about why we didn't get an award in the first round? That, by which I mean, a lot of ESSER money now is going out to the most needy school districts.
Right.
And so if that makes sense. If that were the philosophy for the rest of the grants, then predictably places like Guilford wouldn't get it, no matter how good our grant is. And therefore makes it even more imperative that we understand that those 2 vital positions are going to be, we're going to own. And so on merit, we usually win our grants. And so my suspicion is that this is as much a need question on school districts as it is on merit. And if that continues, then we're never going to look as needy as a lot of places.
I'm cautious to answer that. We only received the notification Friday afternoon. We haven't had an opportunity to follow up and ask for feedback on our application. And I haven't even given the list of awards more than a cursory look at this point. So it could be true. I just haven't had a chance to look at it yet. And I don't know that Dr. Goss or Ms. Trudeau had the opportunity to do it either.
I looked, I didn't see anybody higher than a Dirt D, but I didn't look for that specifically.
All I'm saying is,
That's an interesting.
That was
would
my
rather-
cursory glance as well.
That's an interesting.
thinking about the future, I would rather assume the worst case, that we have to make sure that we can cover it this year if needed, but certainly for next year as well, without the aid of that. And that would be the wise thing for us to think about.
And so I would only note that I'm not suggesting that we need to add those 2 positions to our ad list. It would just argue for
Right.
conservativeness and taking a retirement savings.
Okay.
And I'm reinforcing that.
Thank you.
And I mean, I think I represent the board, given the many conversations we've had over the past few years. We're really committed to keeping the social worker and the psychologist in this budget.
Right.
Our commitment to mental health as well as our teaching positions is quite strong.
Agreed.
There are
Okay.
districts across the state facing what we are up at 7, 8 positions.
Oh.
Like we are fortunate that right now we are talking about 2. I know some close districts that are looking at having to access 7 or 8 positions. So
I read about one today, 13.
yeah, so that's
Um,
probably why we are maybe not in the first round, but I don't think it means that we will be ignored. I just think that they're seeing districts budget these positions out. So. let's hope.
But the warning, and I agree with it, is to take care. Because we may find ourselves having to, much like we did with the 3 classroom teachers last year, adding in unbudgeted positions.
Exactly right.
Okay,
So where does that leave you, Katie, in terms of your suggestion for
well,
use of retirement money?
again, Dr. Freeman, you mentioned 35,000. That's certainly a place to start.
I think that would be reasonable and responsible.
Okay.
My number was a little bit higher.
So I'm sorry, say,
My number was a little bit higher. and I-
Okay.
And I have to say where my head is at least equal out our additions.
Mhm.
You know, let's at least start there. And, you know. Listen, 4 years ago, when my first budget doing this, I had no idea what we were talking about when we were trying to factor in retirement savings and exactly what that equated to. But, you know, 4 years later, we, you know, I'm not saying it's a given, right? We would be foolish to be saying that, but I think it's a safe place. You know, to budget, you know, to take that reduction if needed.
And if, I'm sort of making a big leap here. If we're done with the addition part of the conversation, if we're sort of sitting around $55,000 worth of additions, if we were to book $35,000 as retirement savings, I would suggest that there might be another 20,000 that we could mention, which is, we looked across a number of lines and tried to look for a number of places where we could make small budgetary reductions. They're none of them good ideas, but again, it's spreading it out across a number of lines. So I think that if we were to look for $20,000 in places like transportation, E-rate rebate, textbooks, and some building supplies, that we could then find 20,000 there, add it to the 35,000, and we'd be going up by $197. We could add that in somewhere and still be at a wash, if that's what the suggestion is.
And I want to tell you, that's where my biggest struggle has been, is doing exactly what you just did, because you can go through my budget book and almost every single line with an addition is questioned, right? But I'm not the expert here. You guys are the experts, right? I am not about to question every single line in this budget book to ask, why is this going up? It went up last year. Why is it going up again? Why is it going up even higher? You're doing our due diligence in bringing about the line items that make the most sense that we could take reductions from.
and yeah, thank you. And I'll add to that. I mean, we had some conversations where I went to Dr. Freeman and said exactly that, right? That the members of the board are trying to look very carefully at this. We have asked a number of questions, a number of the additions have explanations in the book already, but we've asked a number of questions about many of the others and gotten, as I noted, answers from Mrs. Trudeau. But as John just already said, I think we're looking to you, and you have created, it looks like, a list of where some additional savings might be found in a way that that you would be better assessing than us, kind of taking lines out without understanding the priority in the way that you understand it.
And we could explain why we shouldn't do that in each of those 4 lines, but the fact is, if we need to, we need to. And again, the caution I would voice here is that if we need to be careful in doing that, because if we go to the Board of Finance, who only has bottom line authority, and they reduce our budget by 100 or 200,000, we'll be back to doing that in more than 4 lines and numbers larger than 5,000. And the more we do that, then the leaner and the closer to the bone.
And we'll be taking things that we're adding in now.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so again, I would just argue for, these are all good conversations, but to be conservative in this conversation, because this may not be the last conversation where
Yes.
and it's always harder when we come back and are told you have to cut 250,000. How do you meet that number? And that becomes a more difficult conversation to have.
Well, to John's 2 points, I agree we should take out the ads. And as far as what line item you take them off of, I don't have any preference. I would just say that between the retirement and our ad, between the retirements and these savings, we should at least equal what we added.
Oh, I completely.
But I'm
agree.
not saying
I mean, I
take
would
from
love
textbooks
to.
or take from,
Love to go for
you
that.
know, just wherever it needs to be.
We've gone over those lines and feel that again, 20,000, we could certainly do that, spread it across. And then the board knows as well as anybody, we may not get these exactly right, but the budget is fungible. And so if we were wrong by taking it out of transportation, then at the end of the year, you always make transfers where we will adjust those. And we talked about that a little bit last Tuesday evening when we talked about how an unspent line ends up helping us out when there's an overspent line somewhere else.
So I'm looking at a list of a couple of ideas. Can I assume, reading from top down, that these are prioritized? Or would you rather have?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
it's more of a brainstorm list, and so it's
Okay.
not necessarily an order of priority. I would suggest, however, that the transportation and the telephone, internet, board members who aren't looking at this, I believe I emailed it to you literally while we were sitting down this evening. But I believe those two numbers are numbers that we could take, right? You could take that. And that's going to be, what is it, 17,500, and then we can find that balance
So,
by spreading it across.
sorry, so that this would be a reduction of 8,000 from the transportation line. Because there is an expectation that the vinyl BOAG could be accommodated without that 8,000.
Mrs. Trudeau has been working with the bus provider to try to work with smaller vehicles rather than full-size buses, and we believe that we have secured that reduction.
And this
So
is in
we-
regards to the start times being altered. Okay.
Right, we know
Okay, thank
we
you.
need to spin a different runoff,
Yeah.
but we realized we didn't have to run a full-size
Full
bus.
bus.
Okay,
So that sounds like this is a safe place to take from.
Yes,
okay, so that's 8,000 on the reduction. So what I have right now under reductions, again, these aren't final decisions, these are proposals. 35,000 in retirement savings, and 8,000 from transportation. And then Dr. Freeman, you were noting,
the 9,500 for
From
E-rate
telephone.
savings on the fiber lines. We believe that we can recognize that as a savings through E-rate reimbursement. We would suggest taking that whole 9,500.
and that's telephone, internet. 9,000. 500. Okay. And again, we have not made any final decisions, but per the discussion, at least if we were to consider adding all four assistant coaches. And we were trying to at least get back to the starting 4.78%. Is there a suggestion of another line we would look at specifically?
I would suggest that we could take the balance of that from the textbooks and the building supply lines that are noted there. I believe that you saw some increases at the elementary locations where we increased the per student allocations. We could reduce each of those. We're looking at about 2,500, right? That's left. I think we split that across those two lines, Linda. And that would still leave those principals with still a slight increase over what they had in this year's budget in those areas.
Okay, so one of the things we'll want to discuss as a board is whether we want to be trading,
Well, we talked
This is
about
up there.
this, right? This was a conversation, this was, big on my questions, right? Because, there was some significant increases in textbooks. And I guess the question was, what are these textbooks? Because, there's not a lot of textbook usage, especially at elementary, but as long as there's additional purchases that can be made and there's not a significant loss given this dollar value, I'd be fully in favor of it.
That would not be going.
Given the significant increase that's already there.
That would not be going backwards. And again, if there was a principal that had a necessary request and that line was spent out, we could find an opportunity to fund it from another location. But we believe that those are reasonable and responsible cuts. Again, if we have another big reduction at the Board of Finance level and come back to this table, that could be a different conversation when we sit down next, should we need to sit down again.
So how much would we actually in dollar amount? Because 3,000 to 5,000 for textbooks, then 4,000 for building supplies.
do 1,500 out of each one.
I think that's a little more than we need to, but yes.
Wait.
No, because
Okay.
the $3,000 would get us to, with the other reductions, would get us to 55.5, so it's just a hair more
Right.
than we need.
I was literally saying it's a few
3,000.
hundred more than we need to, but
Okay.
yes, if we did 1,500 out of each, we would now be at an add of 55,197 and a reduction of 55,500, which is a wash.
And I'm sorry, I missed you're saying it's out of 1,500 out of two different lines?
It's-
Yes, 1,500 out of
I have
textbooks,
too many things
Sorry,
open up here.
textbooks will take
1,500 out of
1,500
textbooks
building
and
and admin.
1,500 out of building admin supplies. So those are spread across multiple locations. Minimum 4, possibly 7 locations.
And that just leaves us with all of our elementary schools still getting significant textbook increases.
Over where they were in the
Yeah.
current budget, yes.
Yeah.
And so we'd still be able to buy additions, just slightly fewer additions.
Yeah.
It's not going backwards.
And it's not
Um,
hurting students in any way. It's just, it's availability of
It-
that textbook.
Yeah, it's just we won't be able to buy quite as many new things this year, but we'll still be buying new things next year, just right, reduced by $1,500 in each of those buckets. And so again, with my math, that has an add of 55,197, but a reduction of 55,500. And again, we have to go swing back to capital, but a $500,000 decrease in the capital request in addition to that, which is a significant decrease. I don't know that this board has ever reduced a proposed operating budget by $500,000. And so it's a significant change.
So a discussion to have around this. I'm just gonna raise it, a little bit concerned about taking textbooks out in favor of a coach, or building supplies. I'm just not sure how to think about this.
Well,
They're all important. I'm a little more comfortable with transportation. Because of the expected, right, that's truly an expected area that we think.
Yeah.
Would not be spent, could not be spent, given new
So-
calculations and the work Linda's doing. I just would like to have a conversation about the trade-offs we're making.
Can I ask a question then to Cliff? Possibly, we have a line about abatement for
We-
facilities.
Yeah, I was just gonna go in the same
Okay.
direction. I was gonna say that we could leave the 1,500 in textbooks and building supplies. Cliff, if we were to reduce your abatement line by 3,000. Linda proposed 5 to 10,000. If we run into a serious issue, we will again find those dollars elsewhere. And I appreciate the suggestion. I like the suggestion.
So 3,000 from abatement as opposed to the supplies and the textbooks.
I think I think what you earlier said, this was administrative decision.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
And here we are
Getting into
talking
it.
about
And now
lines.
we're really
We know how much money we need.
Exactly.
They've given us a list. You guys
What
take
I'm
care of it.
suggesting is we're making a decision about adding. So if the administration is taking us into an area that's student supplies, I might reconsider putting 4 coaches back in and go to 3. So that's my suggestion. It is not at all intended to question the advice I'm getting from the administration. It's questioning what we're putting in and what we're trading off, given that suggestion.
And to an earlier point, this is a brainstormed list. It is not an order of priority. I am comfortable putting it into abatement, maintaining the textbook lines. And again, if we ran into a significant issue with hot tile, we might hold textbook purchases in the middle of next year if that was necessary in order to do other work. So I in fact appreciate the suggestion. I think it's a good one.
Again, I'm
it
just
doesn't- Yeah, it does-
asking if we're adding things, let's make sure we're comfortable with then what's being suggested gets taken out. If we're adding 4 coaches, are we comfortable with
Well, then
that's
maybe
my
we make.
question. It's a
the
discussion.
Unsolicited agreement, understanding that what if we have to balance this out, can we take it from things that are not student direct impact? So I mean, abatements. still is
Yeah,
really,
I
right?
was gonna say the
But
same thing.
classroom materials and classroom supplies, that hopefully those aren't the things that come out first, if we're asking for these coaches.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think we have had. And I don't know if we're talking classroom supplies and building supplies, there may be some difference here, right? We've heard for years how we are at 2013, 2014 levels for supplies. We sometimes hear from parents about the fact that they're bringing in tissue boxes and other things into classrooms because we don't provide it. I just want us to think thoughtfully about what we're asking to put in and then what in exchange we're taking out. That's what I'm throwing out. And I am not comfortable taking out those kinds of things. In order to add things that weren't in the original budget and weren't prioritized by the administration. I'm just asking us to discuss it.
To talk about the adding of the coaches, I mean, for me, I felt like we heard from so many community members about how expensive it is to have their kids play sports. And we had people come to us time and time again saying, it's really stressful as a family to have to come up with this extra clump of money to be able to have my kid play a sport. So I feel like it's a responsible ad to keep these coaches in there. I feel like it's directly impacting families in the community where they might not have to come out of pocket so much to be able to fund something that their kids love, something that their kids probably creates their own sense of self, their identity. So I do really think it's important to add the coach positions in.
I agree, but to your point, we don't want to take it away from at the expense of academics,
Mhm.
but it looks like the list that they have. That if we empower them to choose,
Mhm.
that's what they would do. They would choose non-academic.
The abatement, is that just if we find something? Like if something happens to come up that's dirty?
So, yeah, just to fill you in, and this is why I don't feel, or I do feel comfortable backing that number out. We just got the test results back for Calvin Lee, for example, and 2 of the rooms came back negative. So now I can back out some of that price that we had in there for the abatement.
Okay.
So that's why we can do that.
Great,
sense.
okay, Cliff, that's really
That-
clear.
that
Thank
helps
you.
us, thanks, yeah.
Thank you.
Easier give.
Okay, that's helpful.
Say that louder.
So again, if I may, I'm seeing 8,000 from transportation, 9,500 from an E-rate savings, 35,000 from retirement savings, and 3,000 reduction to the abatement line. And that should be a total of 55,000.
Yes.
Great.
55,500.
Thank you, 55,500, thank you.
The additions that have been mentioned, assistant coach for cross country, a coach for the dance club, assistant coach for football, and a coach for the dive team. Sum to 15,197. And then the pension add in 40,000 for a total of 55,197.
This should leave us with an unchanged percent increase, Linda.
So do we need to
Where-
do the
where-
780?
where is
This
that
in-
coming
This
from?
is from Dr. Freeman's
The
most
spreadsheet
recent
that he
spreadsheet that
said.
he just sent us.
It's at the bottom.
I'm just talking about the pension line, how on the new spreadsheet, it's 40,780, not just even 40,000, so.
Is that,
I was figuring I could cover the 780 out of something else if I have to in that line.
Okay.
Because the actuarials is an estimate, so I thought there might be a little bit of an offset there. I wasn't worried about being an exact dollar amount.
Okay,
so you're comfortable with 40,000 and that's a
40,000.
reasonable, okay. Any further discussion on reductions or additions?
I think the only thing that's bugging me is medical. Obviously, I want to heed Joe's advice, right? But we always look at a significant pot of money that is in surplus for medical. That's not to be said that it should be spent, but we're looking at an 8% increase in the medical line right now. We have RFPs that we haven't gotten back any word yet. We just don't know where we're going to be. And that's, it's just a sticking point for me. I know there's nothing we could do about it right now, but that could be changing the dynamic of this conversation greatly in the next week or two.
I agree with you. And maybe
We
it's
can't hedge
something,
it, but
We can't.
Right.
Yeah,
and we haven't met with Board of Finance yet. So, right, but I agree with you that it's something where we have built up a nice fund in that medical fund. And if it's needed at this budget cycle, it'd be nice to know that we can.
But it's a 50-50 proposition. It could just as much when it comes in.
Yeah.
Show that we're way under what we need.
Yeah.
Given where the insurances are,
That's right.
and given post-COVID. So that unlike past years, it's probably a little less assured that we're going to see as much savings as we would hope. That is, it's a 50-50 proposition. So Do we have any sense of when the bids would come back?
February 1 was when we were hoping, right?
So from what I was told, there were no bids on the stop loss insurance. He did not specifically say what the bids, if there were any bids for the medical, but all along he was saying that he didn't anticipate anything coming in different on the medical because our claims are our claims.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that wasn't
that's right.
really where we were looking.
The stop
to-
loss was what we hoped for.
Nobody else is bidding on our business for stop loss, then we're not anticipating a significant
Yeah.
difference with any other provider.
Does that mean that if there's no competition for our stop loss, does that mean our current carrier will feel the need, as with last year, to increase it? That is, they see no competition, they try to get us to raise it much more last year. And then they back down. Will they now decide to go up?
Take it.
Not for this budget cycle. We've got commitments for this budget cycle
Ah.
going forward, but a year out, will we see?
Well, that's important.
Right, and actually it could change in April because what they will do when they do the final renewal, they will look at the most recent claim history.
Right.
And if our claims are down and stay under, then we may see something come April when the actual renewal comes out.
I see.
But we won't hear anything
Okay.
in the meantime.
Which would be great if we ran a 2 or 3 year budget, but we run an annual budget, and so we're always chasing, our calendars just don't align.
That's how we got into the situation we are in this year, where the actual renewal came in lower than our budget. So we're actually contributing under what our budget was because the actual renewal came in lower.
Which-
So we're funding a little bit less in our medical than this year than we had budgeted.
Which is why we were able to put some of those positions in and not tell you that we're running in deficit
Right.
for this current year.
Well, but the good news is we do know we have an acceptable reserve
Correct.
in the worst case, so that we're not taking a chance on this. It's just that it may not come in our favor.
Yeah.
So we're backstopped against the worst
Yes.
case scenario.
We have to be conservative. We have to have the money.
And I share your frustration. The fact that we sit here and make these decisions, knowing that $10.5 million has to be set aside for benefits, is frustrating when we want to be putting dollars into education. But we're an employer. We need to care for our employees. The benefits are necessary and good. I just wish we could spend those dollars on educational focus rather than on a benefit.
Other thoughts on the operating budget, either on the additions offered or reductions? Right? I will entertain a motion if we're ready for that. The motion would reflect, well, behind the motion is, and I'm just going to read it one more time. Additions, 40,000 to pension, 3,505 for an assistant coach cross country, 3,505 for a coach for the dance club, 4,682 for an assistant coach for a football team, and 3,505 for a coach for the dive team, for a sum of 55,197. The reductions, 35,000 in retirement savings, 8,000 from the transportation line, 9,500 from telephone internet, and 3,000 from abatement, summing to 55,500. So I am asking to entertain a motion for a proposed budget increase of $3,136 and $3 million,
Thank
what
you.
am I saying? Oh
Thank you very
my.
much.
$3,136,438, which represents a 4.78% increase. And what's the total then, Linda? I calculated the increase, but not the total.
68,766,000 $1,172.
Do we want to have a separate motion for bonding?
Yes, we
Yeah.
need to
So
actually.
moved.
So moved. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any?
Thank you very
against
much. I
Or
know that's a lot.
abstentions? Okay. So is that, we got everyone, right? I didn't see everyone. Okay. So bonding, there has already been a discussion on the bonding proposal. Of course, no, this is I'm opening a discussion. We're not taking a vote yet. You had a question. Go right ahead.
With regard to fixtures and furnishings for the 595 building. I understand that the bond request is for 300,000. But that's just a request, right? Like if we wind up furnishing it for 200,000, we just don't spend the other 100,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, so we would bond that amount, but we would only spend out what we spent out, and then that purchase would be bid out or would be purchased off of a Connecticut pre-approved bid list.
Okay.
But yes, just because we bond that dollar amount doesn't mean we are under an obligation to spend all of
It
it.
just means that we're not gonna go above that amount.
Correct.
It's like a ceiling, but not
Yes.
necessarily a guaranteed spend. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And could that money be carried over to the next operating budget? How long does a bond last?
So the bonds last until they're spent or closed. And so a good example is that when we had a changing interpretation of the fire code and needed to swap out locks in all of the schools, we identified a cost of $600,000. Mr. Gurnham was able to work with the town and the bond attorney, and we found several other security bonds that were not completely spent. We were able to make that lock upgrade without having to use new dollars or bond new dollars. And so the bond is there until it is spent out, or until the work is done, it is closed, and the unspent dollars are then returned to the lender, right? It goes back to.
Yeah, it doesn't actually get bonded until it's spent out, so we would make the purchases using other funds,
Oh, I see.
and then
Get paid back.
once we say it's done, then they do all the bonds. And if we don't spend the whole amount, we just don't bond for it.
Got it.
Okay.
Can I
Thank you.
ask about the furniture line? Was this a process of getting multiple estimates? Was it just based on an estimate? And we're in a high rate of inflation right now, with the cost of materials, so like if the furniture is purchased and, you know,
It was based off the state contract,
Uh-huh.
and we had a recent price to come in, so. When I put together the budget. Now already probably 3 months ago or thereabouts, this is the price that we came up with, so.
you say state contract though, so that was it bid to, it's not a bid yet, or is it a bid?
It is bid,
Okay.
yeah, so
The contract gets bid out in advance,
Right,
and then the towns and municipalities can call in.
can call
And
it.
use those bid numbers.
Okay, so you have a set number with
Mhm.
which these contractors have to abide
Yep.
by.
Yes,
And
the
then
guaranteed rate,
municipalities
yeah.
event, that's
Exactly.
the advantage of doing it that way. Got it.
Yep.
That's what I just wanted to make sure that we're not getting like hit with some high market rate now that could drop in 6 months and then we've overspent.
Also, I'll just note that on the many offices that I've done at the state level, 12,000 an office is
I know, that's the
Yeah.
average, yeah.
unfortunately.
And there's about what, 25 offices we're talking about?
Talking about 26 office spaces, and we asked Cliff to do a quick survey, and essentially the furniture in most of the existing offices is 20 to 30 years old or is hand-me-downs that came out of classrooms. Guilford Savings Bank when they renovated, other local vendors who donated their furniture
I'm just
to
shaking
us.
your head.
So we could certainly move that existing furniture into the high school. We've determined some into the new location. We've determined some of it probably wouldn't survive being moved. But if we can do it the right way, again, this is a suggestion to do it the right way.
I would argue that for attracting talent, retaining talent, it's probably an important investment.
I agree.
It's a public facing building. It's where the community comes in and sees the schools to some degree. And so, yes.
Any other questions or discussions about that item? And then the other item, Baldwin Middle School gym floor replacement. I don't know that this requires any discussion. It sounds like a really,
Yeah.
really.
It is the
really
highest priority on this list.
Yes. I think the last time we were in Baldwin, Mr. Hamel was saying that, they were sanding and he was afraid that the wood was going to disappear
It is a
under the
paper- it's a
sander.
paper
So
thin hardwood
it's,
floor.
it's not good.
Can I just, sorry, just to go back to the fixtures and the furnishings, so if we, God willing, and it won't happen. Because I worked in this industry for a long time, the furniture purchase, if it comes in at like 225, we're not just gonna spend that 75. We're gonna,
Absolutely not.
all right,
No.
so if we just can have the understanding, because I think for the community, at a time when families are really hurting and barely being able to pay their electric bills. And I hear, like we want to be able to furnish these offices appropriately, that we're not being
Profligate.
frivolous with this. And that however we can find an economy of scale, that we will pursue that.
Absolutely.
I will just feel better about that.
Other discussion on any of the bonding before we vote tonight?
We've officially nixed the elevator. We've eliminated that.
I believe that it would make sense to remove the $493,680 for the elevator modernization. It could at least be put off, if not avoided.
Fully agree.
So. Linda will help me out here, I think, but what, I think that changes then, the total I have for, the bond estimate to $1,031,260. Down from the 1524,940. All right, I will entertain a motion based on this discussion to put forward a bonding request that includes the Baldwin Middle School gym replacement floor, fixtures and furnishings for it sounds like 26 office spaces at 595. And as is typical, an A&E for future projects of 107,100.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Total being 1,031,260. Is that still a motion, Mr. Delventura? Still a second, Mr. Vedra? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay, so we now have a proposed operating budget for 2023-24 that we will submit to the town and to the Board of Finance, and will be published for the town, and a bonding package as well. I want to thank all of the public that was involved in this process. Those who came to our budget forum in the fall, which we hold before we even have a budget, those who participated in our public forums in January, those who reached out to us in other ways, emails, etc. And those of you who are watching and listening and just paying attention, we appreciate all the engagement. I want to thank Mrs. Trudeau for answering numerous questions from Board of Ed members as we went through this process.
Yes.
And also thank the administration for doing likewise. And to my colleagues for taking the time to go through this budget many times, trying to understand it, and trying to put forward a budget that we have confidence meets the needs of our students, as well as tries to be very aware of who supports us, which is this community. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, it's been a long.